Okay, at this point we have all of the blocks glued down. The blocks were spray painted black individually, then they were glued down onto the base here, and now we're going to apply a dry brush of a medium gray. And after we dry brush it medium gray, it's going to be done. So there's only one dry brushing step involved in this. Now, if you've already done dry brushing on other projects, you probably don't need to watch this video because there's nothing new that's going to be here. I really designed this video for those of you, if this is your first project and you've never dry brushed before, or if you've never done just a single dry brush on black, then you'll probably want to watch this and see the steps that I do it here. Now, as far as paint, we're going to dry brush a medium gray, and that is made of 2 parts white and 1 part black. And you can use regular plain acrylic craft paint if you want. Now, if you use house paint like this is acrylic latex house paint, it's going to be thicker, so you're going to need to add 1 part water to it. So the recipe, if you're using house paint, is 2 parts white, 1 part black, and 1 part water. Now, I'm kind of skipping ahead in the video a little bit here. This is a room that's completely finished. It had the flat black underneath and the medium gray was dry brushed. And when I did this, I just kind of very carefully went over it and tried to avoid the floor as much as possible. And I did that for the entire project and it worked out pretty well. But there was one room that I kind of messed up on a little bit. If you can see on this particular room right here, I did get a little bit of gray right here that I didn't mean to. Now, if you're worried about getting paint on the floor like this, what I've done is created a series of masks. This is on the same PDF file that the printed floor is on, and you can choose to print it out if you want. Basically, you just cut these shapes out, and you can just take it and kind of set it in the corner like this. And when you're painting, you can simply just dry brush, and you can push as hard as you want and not worry about getting paint on the floor. Now, I've printed these masks off on the same sticker material that I used to print the floors with. So it's a little bit stiffer and it's got kind of a moisture resistant backing. So if you cut them out there, they'll hold up pretty well by themselves. Now, I've made these shapes pretty basic and simple. So if you have a room, let's say like this, you can take one that's this shape, drop it in, and you can dry brush and not have to worry about hitting the floor. I mean, if you got the area here, you could just take something like this, drop it in there, and then you can hit both of these sides. If you have something that's like a regular hallway, these long strips are pretty nice. You just drop them up against there, and then you can dry brush without having to worry about getting it on the floor. You just flip it around and you can use it on the other side like that. Some rooms are a little bit trickier in shape, like this one right here. So if you've got the interior like right here, you can always just drop it in there and not have to worry about hitting the floor, or you can move it over to this side and not worry about hitting the floor. If you've got a larger area of room, you could always use this one right here and then do the rest of the 2 walls. And of course, when you have the interior corner like this, you can always drop this in, or you can, use a larger L shape if you want to go ahead and protect the floor around where you're painting. Now, I've laid down 2 plies of paper towel. You're also going to need a really soft brush. This one's about 3/4 inch wide and about as soft as I could find. Now, when we say dry brushing, usually it means that you take a dry brush, put it in paint, wipe most of it off, and then lightly go over the surface of what you're painting. However, what I'm going to do is I am going to take this brush and I'm going to dip it in water and soak the bristles really well. Now, this is going to seem like doesn't make a lot of sense since we want the brush to be dry. But what I'm doing is I'm putting water deep up into the bristles. If we don't wet the brush first, if we don't soak the bristles all the way up to the top, paint is slowly going to dry up in the brush and we will never get it out. And it will end up destroying the brush. The brush is going to end up, the bristles are going to end up flaring out and they're never going to come back when we got paint stuck and dried way up deep in the bristles. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to dry all of this excess water out of the brush. Just get it and just kind of go back and forth, and you want this brush to be really dry. Now, the brush will be dry, but water will still be way up trapped in the brush there, and that's where we want the water trapped so it doesn't ruin our brush. So after we get most of this water out of the brush, we're going to dip it in the paint, and then we are going to brush it on the paper towel. So I kind of loaded up the brush, and I'm going to paint most of it on the paper towel. Now, you're going to need extra paper towels for this because there's only so much paint that this towel is going to hold up. And we don't want to see much paint on the brush at all. So if I'm painting down here, it looks like there's really not much paint going on down there. Okay, so at this point, I think we're ready to go. Now, further in the video, I'm going to tell you when the paint is too wet, when the paint is too dry, and when you need to clean out the brush because the paint is no longer any good. So let's just dig in and see what we got here. So I'm going to start with this room right here, and usually you want to start in a surface. I'm going to start on the bottom. This is a black foam core board, and if I lightly brush across it, I'm just barely getting a few streaks on the bottom. You see that? There's really not much there. I think that's pretty good. And we're going to start with the flat outside. I wouldn't start on the inside first. The outside is easier to judge if the paint is really going to go on right. So that's what I want to do, is I want to start with the outside here. I'm going to very gently dry brush across it. And if you see I got just a little streak right there, that means we got a little bit much on here, but let's just keep going. Let's just dry brush across this. I'm just very lightly using any pressure. And you notice I'm going across it diagonally, and I'm not using much pressure, and it's taking a lot of strokes. So I'm going to go back and forth. Now, at this point, I really feel like I've probably got a little bit more paint on the brush than I need, but I'm not seeing big, awful, horrible streaks on it. So I think we're actually doing pretty good on this one. So I'm kind of gently dry brushing over it, and you can see that the paint is starting to pick up on the details real well. So at this point, it looks like the brush is doing fairly well. And if the brush is acting right, and if paint is going on and you're getting a pretty good result, that's the point I would say stop and go ahead and do the inside, because the inside is going to matter a little bit more. So at this point, you can see that I'm actually starting to get a good bit of detail on the inside here. I'm starting to get it down below. And you notice that the pillars are kind of getting hit a little bit too much. That's because the paint is just a little bit, I got a little bit too much paint on the brush, or the paint is still a little bit too wet. But it's one of those things that when you're first painting it on, paint is going to dry slightly darker than when you first apply it. So as I'm applying it to the surface here, and it seems like, wow, this is really stark, it's going to dry a little more faded or a little more dull. So I'm going to continue to go over the surface here, and it looks like, you know, I have not refilled this brush yet. This is the very first time I had actually put the brush in. So this single dry brushing on black is going to go a long way. At this point, I've used up most of the paint in the brush, and I paint and paint and nothing more happens. So it's time to refill the brush. So what you can do is just pick it up off the paper towel again. Pick it up off the paper towel and then wipe a little bit off, because there may be more paint in the brush than you think. So after you pick up paint in the brush, start with a fresh side. Here, let's get this in the camera. And then very, very lightly go over it and see how it acts. Yeah, it looks like it's acting pretty good here. So I picked up a little more paint, and that looks like it's going pretty good. So I'm picking up a little more paint, and it looks like it's still acting pretty good. Now, at some point, I'm going to be painting. I can't really find a side to do it. I'm going to be painting, and nothing is going to be coming off the brush. And nothing is going to be coming off the brush. So at that point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip the brush back into the main tub of paint. And see, I've loaded up my brush with paint. And then I'm going to paint it back down onto the paper towel. Now, once you do that, you have got a lot of paint on the brush. So I am going to, let's see if I can zoom this back out. Take a spot on the paper towel down here and wipe all of that excess out. Wipe all of that excess out. You don't want this excess paint. Whenever you reload up that brush, you're going to have a lot of excess paint. Get rid of it, because it's going to mess things up for you. So what you want to do at that point is you might take a new room and paint across the bottom. Now it looks to me like this is a little bit more paint than what I would really want, because it looks like it's streaking. It looks like it's going on a little bit, you know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint a little more paint out of that to try to get it down to where it doesn't quite do that. So I think that worked out pretty good. And then once again, start on a flat side. And then if it's acting well on the flat side, yeah, see, I'm barely going across it. I'm not seeing any major streaks. And you will find that the drier and drier the paint gets, in other words, as I put more paint on this paper towel and the paper towel sucks the moisture out of the paint, this paint is going to be drier and drier until this paint almost turns to like putty. Okay, it's going to be getting thicker and thicker and thicker as time goes by. And there will be a point at which I can no longer successfully paint the piece or put it on the piece because it's either going to blob on or not go on at all. At that point, you will need to wash out your brush, get a new paper towel, and start the whole thing out from scratch. But let's see how many pieces I can plow through before that happens. We have one room that is successfully painted and looks good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save this room. I'm going to set it aside in a different place, and I am going to compare. So what I do is once I start a new room and I get this room painted up, I'm going to take this room that I've just now painted, compare it to my original room, and see if we're pretty close on the paint job. See if it's like, well, you know, this new one that I did, it just needs a little more paint to match the original one. As I'm putting this on, to me it's starting to look like, this is pretty stark. Let's say you get a close-up on this. You see how the archway here is stark, the pillars are stark, but black is still black. There's not as much shading on that one as there is on this one. If you take a look at this one right here, hopefully it's focusing on the camera, and you take a look at this one here, this one is a lot more stark. The reason it's more stark is because this paint is drying out. So it looks like I could probably do about two rooms, two big rooms before I really need to start washing this brush out and kind of starting, you know, from scratch again. Now, once you've got all this paint down on the paper towel and this is starting to dry out and the painting is looking real stark, there's not a lot of different shades of gray. You either got solid gray or you got black. That's, you know, real stark contrast there. If that starts happening and your paint that means your paint is too dry. And if your paint is too dry, another thing you can do is take a cup of water like this and put your fingers in it and then just sprinkle a little water on the paper towel like that. Okay, just sprinkle a little bit of water on it. And then as you rub over the paper towel, that kind of rehydrates the paint a little bit. So now your paint is not as much like putty as it used to be. So that will allow you to, when you start painting again, once again, I'm going to start on just a regular straight side here. If you start painting again, it's starting to come out better. Yeah, I put a little bit of pressure on it. Yeah, that kind of revived the paint. It made it so that I did not have to wash the brush out from, and start from scratch. Those few drops got the paint to act real nice like it's supposed to again. So if the paint's being friendly, if the paint is acting nicely, then I'm going to start on the inside again. Now, as I'd mentioned, at some point, the paint is just not going to go on right. For some reason, it's just not acting as nice as it did before, and you don't know what to do. You don't know how to get it to act nice again. You know, you've tried putting drops on there, and it's just still not working. In times like that, when the paint is too dry and it's just not coming back, it's time to clean out the brush. So what you want to do is you want to take this paper towel, you want to throw it away, and I am going to take water here, a cup of water, and I am going to wash the brush out. Now, don't just go jam, and, you know, just kind of ruin the brushes. Usually you lean it against the side of the cup and kind of twist the brush like that. And then you can kind of squeeze the bristles out. You want to rinse it out nice and completely. And then we will replace it with a new paper towel. And we're going to start again just like we did from the beginning. So let's see. Let's get a couple of paper towels down. Sometimes what I do is I set the paper towels down and I just set it, you know, on top of the old one. That way, you know, and what it does is it kind of gives you a little more layers to kind of dry this paint out with. So I've washed the brush out, dry it really well, you know, and let's not knock our cup of water over. So we're going to dry it out really well. I can't see any more water coming out of the brush. Then we're going to reload our paper towel back up. I'm going to dip it in the paint. I'm going to put the paint back on the paper towel. And then we are going to dry most of this out. Look at all that paint coming out of the brush. I don't want that paint, I want to go really lightly with what we're doing here. So let's get all of that excess out. And if you find out that you're filling this up and it's still not getting all the paint out of the brush, if you have to, grab yourself another paper towel. Start working on another paper towel. So I can just take like a paper towel like this and then kind of see, yeah, it looks like it's acting pretty good there. And once again, take a piece, start with the bottom. This is just what we did before. Yeah, see, that's acting pretty nice. See, it's not doing streaks. It's not, you know, I don't know if you can see the difference, but it's going on a lot nicer. So once again, start with a flat side. Very flat side, very gently go over the flat side. And you'll notice that this thing is starting to act like it did when you first tried it out. Now you're also going to have to paint these small blocks that go on either side of the door. I found the easiest way to dry brush these is to put two of them together and hold them in your fingers like this. And you're going to get paint on your hand, but you know, you probably won't get a lot. What you're going to do is you're going to gently dry brush over one side like this, and then flip them both over, and then dry brush the other side like this. And then take the two and then put them side by side so you're exposing the two sides that have not been dry brushed yet. Go ahead and dry brush those. Go ahead and flip them over and dry brush the other side. Be sure they're lined up. And then finally you want to dry brush the tops of the blocks like right here. And that way they'll be ready to glue on either side of the door, and so we've got all sides of these blocks painted.